Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack 4 Business Podcast. Over 350 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game.
So, a question for the audience. How do you lead your business with clarity and confidence when everything around you feels uncertain and overwhelming? That's exactly what Electra will talk about. How to navigate uncertainty, unlock growth, and lead with purpose through peer advisory boards, executive coaching, and strategic team building. If you're feeling stuck or unsure about your next business move, tune into the story. Discover how to find clarity, build resilience, and take focused action starting today. Our guest today is Electra Govoni from the Alternative Board or TAB. So, a little more about Electra. She is the CEO of the Alternative Board, Boston Northwest. With over 30 years of leadership in the FinTech industry, from State Street to BNI Mellon, Electra has driven operational excellence and led dynamic teams through change. Now she empowers forward-thinking business owners to scale up, boost profits, and lead more fulfilling lives through coaching, peer advisory boards, and talent strategy. As a certified STRAP Pro facilitator and executive coach, she helps leaders overcome self-doubt, think creatively, and take focused action. Based in Burlington, Massachusetts, Electra also serves the community as president of the Winchester Historical Society and brings heart, strategy, and integrity to everything that she does. Electra, it's an absolute pleasure having you here today. Thank you for being here. Do you have a favorite quote or saying you want to impart to folks?
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I have two. One is a quick one. You can't read the label when you're inside the bottle. And the second one comes from Theodore Roosevelt. People know it as the man in the arena. And so it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, or who at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat. I love that.
This is the third guest that has mentioned the art of failure and learning from it. You need that to go to the next point.
Yeah.
We seem to be running a theme here, and it's unplanned. This is awesome.
People only see the end notes, which is, oh, look how great we were. And look at what we achieved. Like the pain, the blood, the sweat, the tears. How many failures came before? Often people don't even expect them because they don't see that part of the story. And yet it's a part of what made you so successful.
FinTech to coaching and advisory work. What swung the yard arm from one to the other?
Working in technology in the financial industry, you're always trying to find the better way. Wouldn't it be even better if we could do X? If we could make this faster, bring in more data, have better analysis, make smarter decisions based on what the technology could provide? Love that. There was a point in my career in which I went from working within investment management firms to working at a software company who sold into that industry. The software company, when I arrived, was running like 10 years in, but running like a startup. There was no process. People were running around. The weight was on the shoulders of maybe 10 people, even though there were 100 people in the company. And we were in danger of not surviving because internally it was a house of cards. And I was part of the team that helped build the foundation inside out That was such a challenging, yet I loved the experience of being able to create that and knowing that this company was now going to be strong enough to move forward and grow. That when I got to the point in which I felt like, you know what, 35 years in this industry is good enough. It's time for me to jump off and do something else. That was a big inspiration and jumping into coaching and advisory work.
Words tend to get thrown around in the coaching business. I want you to tell me what's the similarity and what's the difference.
Mhm.
Uncertainty and chaos. Are they
Mm.
two ways to say the same thing, or are they different words?
I think uncertainty feels a little calmer. There's question marks flowing, but when you say chaos, it feels like all the rules we knew are out the window. We have to study the terrain as if we're exploring in a way that has never been explored before. So I would say if you were thinking of a continuum, you might move from uncertainty to chaos. At least that's the way I could think about it.
How does one make sure they're agile enough when a market shifts
Mm.
to have their mindset shift as quick?
It is something that when you get stuck, think of some of the reasons why someone gets stuck. They could very well be really all in on panic situation. It's a high fear. Their level of fear is very high. And I will tell you, it's really hard. It can be paralyzing. You can be full of overwhelm. You might have your clients coming at you at great volumes looking for answers to questions that you don't have. And that is a very, very difficult situation. It's always nice if you have perhaps prepared a bit for the days in which the cash flow isn't so positive and that you've built a bit of resiliency already in your financials. You've got some reserves, you've got strong relationships. So if you had to go to a bank and get something to happen, you're not starting from, hi, let me introduce myself. I used to have a great balance sheet. I don't right now, but I promise you it should get better. It's better to have these things already factored in. However, I'd also recommend it when things are fast and furious, get good data about what exactly is happening. What's real, what's immediate, what perhaps is 3, 6 months, maybe more out, and start to get your bearings so you can move out of the panic and the onslaught and out of just that, I got to react, which you can actually start to think about what we're going to do to get out of the hole we're in and into what might actually be a good opportunity of this moment. And you move from just total terror to, okay, I've now thought about it and understand that my marketplace looks very different, but I see a very rich possibility. So now how do I motivate to move in that way? So these are some of the things that when you can start to get out of the frozen and into some form of action, if things start to change, and I can guarantee you, you'll feel a whole lot better too.
One of the things I've noticed that if someone has if their mother tongue is another language other than English, when they get wound up, the first words out of their head usually is of their mother tongue and not English. So that means if someone is running into a chaotic moment,
Yeah.
where do they get stuck on? Where do they default to?
Well,
To no benefit.
it's one of the scariest things you can do is not be aware, or sometimes it's head in the sand type of syndrome, in which you're not acknowledging the fact that something's changing. You're kind of just saying, I'm sticking with my plan. It's a good plan. And God damn it, I'm going to ride this horse. Your ability to continue to assess what's happening and adapt is a pretty powerful skill at these moments, and it will serve you very well. And I'm not saying run around like a chicken with your head cut off, you need to be able to figure out what your best next plan is. I'm a big fan of scenario analysis and thinking about what if, let's take this scenario that's very important to my business. Let's play this out in some different ways. What's my plan and what are my markers to see which plan we should pivot to based on the fact something is now costing me X? Having that notion of here's my plan for this condition. If it's this condition, I know how to shift. Once again, you're putting yourself back into a proactive mode as best you can and out of that reactive, I'm just trying to hold the pieces together. And having, again, good data, good numbers, good metrics, nothing sexy about it. But if you're trying to steer something, those things can be your sanity.
The calmness in your day.
Yeah.
I really promote and believe in peer advisory boards. And being a life coach, I obviously believe in coaching. I'm a little bit confused about when you'd use one or the other and when you'd use both. Could you fill in those blanks for me?
Sure. In my practice, I put together peer advisory groups. These are business owners. Everyone around the table is your peer. I think about the size and complexity of a business. And that's another factor to say, what's the best peer group for you? Our discussions are around strategic decision-making, execution, and what's getting in the way, in which we are hoping, the reason my business is called TAB, the alternative board, is the notion that this is an alternative to a board of directors, which small businesses don't generally have the ability just to kind of like create for themselves. So you're looking for this peer group to be a trusted circle for you. They don't have a horse in your race. What they have is a ton of experience of the good things that have happened. And honestly, you learn as much from the things that blew up. And they can give these insights and perhaps help you see beyond what you might view as the perfect plan. Someone could come at it and say, I don't even think you've thought about this other factor. If we're working a plan, we're going to try and make this the best damn plan we can with these collective insights. And I'm sure as a life coach, you're not, the notion of blind spots and where someone themselves may get stuck because there's certain aspects that they just don't see. They're not wired to see it. These peer groups help you to point out like where you're missing the boat. And sometimes, from a person standpoint, sometimes it's the kick in the pants you need to stop designing and start doing it because you are good enough at this point. Move out of design, move into action. The other big thing is accountability. If you say you're going to do something, the expectation is very high that you're a person of your word and that you will have taken action and we're going to want to hear about it. That level of support really helps a business owner navigate what we know is inherently hard work.
So basically, you've just described peer support sounds almost like crowdsourcing with a little bit of filtering. But you also said advisory board like a board of directors. Do you have the same protection as a board of directors would? Whether they're paid or not? Is it paid or unpaid?
Everyone is sort of a paid member. Everybody in this peer group is going to also ask advice of the group. Everyone has a slice of time in which we're going to take on an important topic that business owner is facing. And what I'm trying to design in creating these groups is seeing that we have a nice cross-section of business acumen.
Yeah.
And we actually use DISC behavioral profiles to kind of help us from who's showing up and where they're going to go at a particular problem. Who thinks about risk? Who thinks about opportunity? Who thinks about the people in the equation? Who thinks about what needs to get done? It's all important. And we don't all think about the same thing at the level that's needed given the challenge we're trying to solve.
When they're in, though, is the group then responsible for the outcome, or is it just like my coach tells me to do something, I either consent, dissent, or halfway, half measure, right? It's still up to me, right?
It's up to the person. So say we have a half hour and we take on something. My last question as we're wrapping up this topic is, what are you going to commit to over the next 30 days to take action on this? There are times in which someone had a particular piece of advice and it's like, that one, I'm going to go do that. Sometimes it's sort of a combination of things, but it's up to you. What you decide is the next step that you're going to take, but we're going to hold you accountable for doing whatever you decided to do.
I love to think about what my listeners want. And I find that they want to hear a success story and a train wreck. Now, I know I can't use names, but if you can fill in those two blanks for me, that would be awesome.
I will tell you, success stories can come in so many different shapes and sizes because you're meeting business owners in very different modes of operation. When we're working with startups and people who are just getting started, the success story comes with they figured out who their target market is. They figured out how to sell and convert, and they built a revenue generation machine that is working on all cylinders. I've met people who are just figuring it out. They've had some success, maybe making under 100,000 in a year, and we're looking to 2x, 3x, 5x. It's amazing what can happen, particularly at that stage, to go from that to like $500,000 in a fairly short period. And so we're designing how to do that successfully. You're even starting to think about how to build scale into your business. A lot of that comes with designing. We're going to get really clear on our messages. We're going to what our unique selling proposition is and how we differentiate. And by doing that consistently, I have absolutely seen businesses really just blow some numbers through. We always set something called the champagne moment and said, all right, if I get to this goal, we're gonna open champagne. And there are times in which we were shooting too low. We blew the doors off. We went 10x. Now, when it comes to the other side of the equation, the train wreck usually gets boiled down to lack of action. Like this person is very much will talk about this with an appearance that they will take action at some point in time. And then it's all excuses because sometimes the actions are not comfortable. They're not feeling within the strength of this person. And then it becomes, I'm going to procrastinate. I'm going to find reasons why it can't be versus reasons why, okay, maybe this isn't me, but I got to find another way to do this thing and commit to different types of ways of solving a problem. When there is no commitment for action, it is a train wreck.
To me, obviously you're looking for change, and the change hopefully is always towards the positive, but you can have a negative consequence because someone didn't take action. When you have these people as peers, do you find that all of a sudden someone is 10-fold, 20-fold, 50-fold growth? Is the peer group still a fit? Conversely, if it goes the other way, in other words, someone goes, oh my gosh, my life, it could be some other external things that are happening, their life's falling apart, either the health, family connections, etc., and best laid plans on mice and men.
Yep.
Versus someone is now, they're just rocking it. They become the Nike. Do you find them staying in the group? How do you assemble the peer group? I guess it might be the best question. What happens? Do you outgrow it?
You do outgrow it. And that's a great story. For example, one of our starting point peer groups is something called an accelerator board. This could be a solopreneur because we usually say around 5 employees or less. It's very possible that because someone was 5x, 10x, and they had to start to hire, the dimensions of their business changed. And also, usually the nature of their problems start to change. And what I'm always asking is this the best group, given the new set of problems that you're likely going to be dealing with? Is this still the best group to be your thought partners? What you almost do when your business is on the ups, you graduate to a different board. And so you go to a board in which your business is now much more in line. You might be the newbie or on the smaller dimension of what this new board has accomplished, but that's great because you're in perfect position to use that to keep the growth going. When someone is encountering, and you described a bunch of things, and this happens all the time, like things are blowing up, and it's not always the business. It could be something very personal happening. Because this group has become a trusted circle, you don't just talk business. Often, as we give our updates, sometimes the update is, I'm really worried about my son. There's a level of depression that I see setting in with him, and it's having an effect on my business, it's having an effect on my family. We're not in there to say, I think your son should do this. That's not what we're there for, but we're there to help give this person a place to talk. And what compounds it is now I'm worried because my focus isn't there. I feel like my hand's coming off the wheel. Here, what are some ways? So while you're experiencing this, your business is still going to be okay. But we're going to try to help however we can.
So the elephant in the room, what is a strap pro?
What is strap pro? So that actually came from this notion of strategy meeting productivity. And at the heart of this is for a small business that has a leadership team. Could be 2 people, could be 3 people, could be 10. With a leadership team to be effective, you got to get aligned. You have to have a shared understanding of what is the strategy that you're implementing and what is the accountabilities to execution and what's the execution plan. Strat Pro is a series of workshops that take a leadership team through that process and into execution. This group goes from finger pointing or almost being like it might as well be working in different companies because they're all taking their own approach to getting in line in the same boat or pulling in the same direction. Typically, it's agreed upon metrics for how we're going to judge success, who's going to make decisions, and what that looks like. You're covering it all. And, the hope is at end result is you've got a leadership team that is just going to deliver.
So coaching a person, sometimes we don't, where are we at? And sometimes that needs to change for us to go to the next level. How do you help a person adjust their own internal beliefs?
Well, the starting point is typically putting a little bit of light on it, getting someone to understand what their tendencies are. So I mentioned we use DISC as a for instance, and DISC helps you understand, like all these frameworks, you tend to have a strong association with the typical patterns of behaviors. Let's say I'm a high D in a DISC thing. It tends to me I'm a dominant personality. It tends to me I'm very driven for results. It tends to me I get frustrated easily. I don't like a lot of detail. And I'm about results. If you're not going to be able to deliver, you are noise to me. And this isn't a warm and fuzzy person,
You get a hug from that one.
I'm listing all sorts of things that someone who's very heavily into this thing, this is the way they see the world. What they may not see is when you are very abrupt with this person, they actually have a very different way of seeing the world. You are shutting them down. You are insulting them. What I like to try and do is have someone appreciate the fact that there's power in the fact that people see the world differently. And now, how do you leverage the work of your company so that you can figure out how to align the skills and natural talents of your team in a way that they can contribute to the best of their abilities? And that perhaps means that sometimes You have to figure out how you can enable the team's success. And so by starting with those things that say, well, this person's just stupid, sometimes self-limiting is you're beating yourself up because you want more of another, is starting to realize, okay, how is it one can start to perhaps imagine different ways that you might respond to something? Work away from maybe your more traditional, okay, when this happens, I do this, to say, well, when this happens, let's figure out maybe 3 different ways in which I could have responded. And let's start to build some, new neural pathways that allows for a different type of action that should lead to a different type of outcome. It's not going to feel comfortable. You might have to try on something first and fake it till you make it. You are typically soft-spoken and you need to speak very confidently. Sometimes you have to put it on and exercise those muscles. You can move beyond those things. So it's identification, perhaps strategizing different tactics and different modes, giving yourself a place to exercise these new things, hopefully lower risk moments, and then rinse and repeat. What starts off as perhaps a self-limiting belief to a growing confidence that you're able to navigate on a much broader range.
What I find is some entrepreneurs are very much adrenaline junkies. They not only thrive in chaos, they seem to need it. And one thing that I think in a perfect world, someone willing to take advice, be accountable, and listen would be spectacular. What happens when you run into a client who even the first grade teacher said doesn't play well with others? How do you tell somebody, you're
It's very true. Not everybody is wired to want to even sit in a meeting that lasts more than a half hour. We have a 4-hour meeting. Some people start to freak out within the first half hour. If someone truly cannot do this, perhaps this isn't for them. So I will agree that for some folks, this isn't their thing. You have to believe that other people, other than what you think, has value. You have to know that, if you always want to be the smartest person in the room and believe that universally, are you there just to tell people what to do? That group does not want that. So perhaps not the best fit for this type of way, but the person who chases the shiny thing, who loves the speed of discovery, there's a role for that person in different methodologies. I'd say this person's a visionary. They're seeing a world that doesn't exist yet. And that's what turns them on. That's what lights them up, and bless them, because we need people who can envision a different reality. But they may not be the best person to operationally run a company. And so with those folks, sometimes it's because they can also make everyone crazy. Everyone charge this way. No. How many people are you creating a level of chaos for when you haven't even solved the first problem you were trying to solve? With them, you're really trying to get them to build an organization that will allow for an implementation of the vision rather than just continual chasing of different aspects of it.
There's a colleague of mine. He says, if there are no problems, there are no opportunities. Not necessarily talking about the shiny object, but how do you capitalize on the chaos to achieve growth? Because if you're looking at something, chaos by its own definition means it's something you just don't understand the rhythm of it yet.
Yeah.
Or might never, depending on the nature of it, right? But that said, if you actually recognize, hey, this is an opportunity, it's sort of like, the lemon lemonade story, right?
Yeah.
Can that help someone going, hang on, what I think is a detriment actually is a boon?
Yes. And when you get yourself out of, say something that is happening very chaotically, so that whether it's not of your making or something bad has happened internally, your ability to move from fear-based scarcity type of thinking. I've got to control, and people act differently in those moments. Sometimes it's like, I got to lock this down. I have to make all the decisions. That can be a way of operating. But to move into what you're describing, which is considering, if I now have to accept a different reality than I had planned for, what barriers might have actually been removed because something has opened up? Like, we're going to be able to say, all right, I used to say we couldn't do this, but in this moment, let's say this thing is possible. What then might we consider we could do? If money wasn't an object, you start to get to a point in which you're shifting from just trying to problem solve to viewing an opportunity and how you might be able to move towards it. It can be incredibly inspiring. What nuggets you find can totally shift a business, but you gotta be in the place to allow that type of thinking to happen. Sometimes when it's this disruptive, you might be in mourning. You're so emotionally tied to the loss that you can't even get yourself to think, but what's the blessing? What could we do to make it a blessing? And ask those type of questions to type and tease out the possibilities. And honestly, this is another moment in which trying to do this by yourself is really hard. Having a forum in which you can consider some wild ideas and not feel like you're going to get shut down. You can explore them. They may get tamed, they might get shifted, but that's the power of having those conversations. You find the gold and then you start to polish it. For most people, you need some other folks to bounce that off of to really get that type of thinking going.
Some of our listeners are solopreneurs, some basically technicians, maybe even an apprentice. I'm guessing that this morphs into something a little bit bigger to get the best benefit. When do you reach that size, and how much money should we be putting in the bank to facilitate this to go forward?
So are you describing a scenario in which a solopreneur, for example, be able to invest in being a part of a peer group, being able to afford this type of support?
Whether he has to scale it to even join.
Generally, the pricing for a peer group and that type of commitment is comparable to what can be afforded with small companies. Our pricing for our accelerator board this year, which is for that small solopreneur, is $550 a month. It's not tiny, but it's also generally not like I couldn't operate if I had to spend this money. And so, we do try and think about what is the proportional value achieved by this investment and keep it like, if paying 1% of what your net revenue is that a worthwhile investment to keep your vision at the forefront and the actions that you take to go reach out and make it happen incrementally throughout the year? What's that worth to you? That's how we like to keep our pricing.
So at the end of the day, when everything's wrapped up, what legacy do you want to leave behind for people? For the businesses, for your operations, what's the happy end state for all things? Where do you see the ship being in 5 years down the pipe?
Well, for me personally, I got into this because there was great purpose for me to want to have small and medium-sized businesses in my community be strong and healthy. When I think of an ingredient of what creates a place of being that people come and they stay, they can afford to be here. The education system strong. And I see small business as a really important ingredient to creating a community that's healthy and thrives for the long term. And so that was one of when I think of that purpose-filled decision, that was very much at the heart of this is good work. This is work that I don't even want to think about retiring. I want to do this work as long as I can. And so for me, having multiple boards in which the folks on these boards are achieving their visions, and sometimes their vision is, I do want to retire. I want to sell this business. And that's good too, because everyone has their own vision for why they're running a company. So if I can continue to play a role in which these great things are happening and our business community is getting stronger and our communities are strong and healthy, life is good. And I feel like that's a great legacy to leave behind.
Electra, there are some areas of geography that you tend to focus in. And if so, how do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, and so my base is right outside of Boston, and many of my boards have business owners who are in the Massachusetts area, into New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. That's where most of my boards exist. To get a hold of me, it's great to reach out. My email, electra@tabbostonnw.com. My phone number is 781-365-9778. And you can always connect on LinkedIn. I'd love that.
Trent, Wayne, and you, the Knack for Business listeners, thank you so much. This has been interesting, and what a great way to wrap up the show and understand that there are people out there that will help you. And it's peer support, an advisory board. What more can you ask for? People that are working for a common cause. So reach out to Electra, and she'll help you break through the uncertainties, offering that clarity component, that coaching component, and the peer support that helps drive your growth and confidence. She's passionate about this piece. That's really important because that's a caring soul.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motivateyou.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website motivateyou.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people: Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert; Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host; Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space; then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner; and Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer: please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.